Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong. I'm Asbed Bedrossian here with Hovik Manucharyan. This episode is being recorded on Wednesday, July 13, 2022. Before we begin the show, we'd like to request that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter. We're very active on Facebook as well. We have a group and a page, so please like our page and join our community by joining our group where you can participate in conversations about every article that we post. All of our Groong links are available on our Linktree page. We'll make sure you have access to that on all of our profile pages and also the show notes for those of you who are listening to this as a podcast. If you like our shows, please share them with your friends and follow us everywhere you are used to getting your news. That helps us a lot. Thanks a lot, and on with the show. In today's Conversations on Groong episode, we're going to talk about a number of topics relevant to Armenia, Glendale, the US, and more. So we are joined by Ardy Kassakhian, who is a Glendale City Councilman and the current mayor of Glendale. Hello and welcome, Mayor Ardy.
Thank you, Asbed, and thank you, Hovik. It's great to join you guys.
Wonderful.
Hey, Ardy.
Wonderful.
Welcome.
So we have so many topics that we're barely going to scratch the surface today. Where shall we start?
Asbed, before we maybe start on topics, Ardy, your last name was always interesting to me, and I never got the chance to ask you about it. Is it related to the village of Kazakh in Armenia, or is there maybe like a historical Western Armenian village that I don't know about? Like, can you...
So the origin of my last name, which is Kassakhian, some branches of our family in various parts went by Kassakhian, but that was because of a mispronunciation of s in regional dialects. From what my family has told me from the origins of our name, our forebears came from the Kassakh River region. So there's probably, if the Kassakh village, which is close to the Kassakh River, has any, if it dates back about 400, 500 years, then it's, which it likely does, then there is probably some connection to Kassakh. But my folks are, my dad's side of the family is from, my father's maternal side is from Ovacik, which was a small suburb of Constantinople, and Gesaria. My great-great-grandfather was the treasurer of 𝐀𝐫𝐝𝐲 before the genocide. And on my mom's side, they are from Stanos and which is a small Greek-Armenian village outside of Ankara, and from Izmir, from Smyrna, before the burning of Smyrna and the expulsion of the Greek and Armenians. After that, my mom's family went to Athens, and then from Athens in 47, they repatriated to Armenia during the Great Repatriation. And my father's side settled in Jerusalem, and he grew up in Beirut. But you know, I'm kind of a mix of a little bit of everything. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, but the name Kassakh has always been a mystery to many because it's not a very common Armenian last name. So anytime we run into anyone with that last name, it's I'm very proud of my names. I love my first name. I love my last name. It was difficult growing up in America with these names, but over time, I've just had a greater appreciation for it.
Keep it. Yeah. Now Ardy Kassakhian is a brand name.
That's always interesting. Speaking of Ovacik, my mom's maternal side is from Bartizag, and I mean, they're close enough where there's a lot of intermarriages. And when I do these DNA tests, I see a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very interesting. I haven't yet to do a DNA test. I don't know if I will. I may. I don't have any particular reason other than time that I haven't done it. Maybe there's a part of me that's afraid of what I may
finding out that we are all fourth cousins,
right?
Yeah.
But that, or maybe I'm related to the Kardashians in some way. I don't know.
Of course, we are related to them.
Yeah, of course. But and no, listen, it wouldn't be the worst thing. They're great. They've done quite a lot to bring attention to the Armenian cause and Armenian issues. But one day, who knows? We will find out that we're cousins. Hovik, you never know. Or Asbed. By the way, I want to thank you both for stuff that you've worked on in the past. I don't believe you guys receive enough credit for. Groong Asbed was something that I always followed when I was in college. I now feel very old when I tell people that email was just coming into use when I went to college my first year at UCLA. And Groong News Network was our number one source for any Armenian related news. And I know that was all on your shoulders.
We've been around forever.
Yeah, and then Hovik, what you did with ExecNet, which was the network for all of the Armenian student associations in California and beyond, was very forward-thinking at the time. I know that we sometimes, all of us, probably feel like relics given some of the gray in our hairline, but
those are the good old days.
Yeah, I think everyone looks at. Yeah. I bristle at terms like the good old days because I feel like we have to be forward thinking, and the good old days came with their shares of problems as well, right? We need to make progress, but certainly you guys saw a need in the community, and while other people would just sit there and wring their hands and complain as to why we don't have what others have, you guys rolled up your sleeves and created something. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, Groong has been around so long that Katya and Kassakhian and Hovik have been with me, helping me since the late 90s. I cannot imagine doing this without them. So,
do you remember our protests that we sort of organized and attended, Ardy, when we were young? That was like, I remember, I think on my earliest memory of being politically active was attending Bob Dole protests in Glendale.
Right.
Well, I think at the time those demonstrations were pro Bob Dole. There was
I should say pro Bob Dole demonstration, and he's done a lot for the Armenian community.
God rest his soul. He was a unique public servant, the likes of which we could definitely use in the ranks of both parties nowadays.
Anyway, enough small talk. Let's begin with our content, Asbed.
So, Ardy, you were elected to Glendale City Council in 2020. Can you describe a little bit about the past 2 years in office for you? It's been anything but usual, right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely been unique. And part of it stems from having been elected in March 3rd of 2020. And then 2 weeks later, about a week and a half later, going into a COVID lockdown, taking my oath of office over Zoom, just learning what Zoom is and WebEx and all these other platforms of communicating, which I think have been great, including what we're using to have this conversation now. But certainly the world has changed. Some of it for the better, some of it for the worse, and some of it has just changed for it is what it is. It's for me, it was perhaps a slightly different experience than other folks who come into this position, because I came in with about 15 years of City Hall experience under my belt, about 15 years of City Hall experience under my belt.
Yeah, you were our city clerk.
Yeah. And that was an elected position as well. I kind of lived in the sausage factory and saw the sausage being made for all these years, seeing how laws are how you come up with ideas for legislation, how you implement legislation, what works, what doesn't work. And so I had this great interest in having a different role where I had more of a say in what impacted my city and what decisions we make for the future. And I think that came about partly because, as I became a parent, as we started our family, just seeing as to what kind of city my son is going to grow up in and how it's changed from when I was, and not to necessarily preserve the past, but to really look ways on how we can do better and preserve those aspects of the past that I think are worth preserving, but also make this a place that, for instance, that young Armenian men and women growing up in this city, and young men and women of all ethnic groups and races do not have the same challenges that we faced growing up in a city that I think was very polarized, that looked as immigrants as occupiers or a fifth column within the city, and really gave everyone an opportunity to participate in the democratic process in this country and in this system of governance.
So what kind of priorities did you come in as a city council person? Like if you had a top 5 or a top 10 Yeah, even today, since we had elections about a month ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those priorities are very basic and simple, common sense priorities. It starts off first with making sure that we have clean and safe neighborhoods, making sure that the city upholds the image of a place where one would want to live, work, raise a family, set down roots. So all of those within that greater quality of life umbrella, there's a number of other subcategories, right? Which include sustainability and making sure that we have clean air and clean water to breathe, that we're being good stewards of the environment, both locally, but also an impact they'll have globally, that we are looking at preserving and supporting our local businesses, our small businesses, which are the backbone of Glendale, in terms of creating jobs, in terms of servicing the community, in terms of making sure that we even have our larger companies that are homegrown or that have decided to call Glendale their home, feel that they have the support of the city, to make sure that, again, that our streets are well maintained, well taken care of, that you do not see the blight that you may see in other parts of Southern California, that we have a transparent and accessible government that is proactive in talking to people, explaining how government works, why it doesn't work, and most importantly, what people can do to make it work the way they want it to. The creation and preservation of more of our open space, creating opportunities. Glendale has become very dense. The southern portion of Glendale, which the 134 freeway is the demarcation line. Oftentimes, people will say, do you live above or below the 134 freeway? As convenient as all the freeways are, highways that bisect our city or pass through or near our cities, we have the 5, the 134, the 210, the 2. These are all terms familiar with folks. And I know folks on the East Coast maybe who are listening to this may bristle, may be angry that we're putting the word "the" in front of our freeways or highways because they don't refer to
5, the 210,
the 5. Yeah, it's a very Southern California thing to do. But all these, as much of a convenience as they are, have also created these lines of division, right? They have, they're more or less these concrete and asphalt scars on the community. So what are we doing to unify the community, bring it together, bring more green space to the densest parts of the city, which is below the 134 area? And one of my proposals is to make sure that we have more parks, and by more parks, I want to create cooperative agreements with all the city schools in the city to open up their playground areas to public access after hours and after school and on weekends. There's a whole host of other things I would like to see. I would love to see the city reform its structure of government. So we have a paid council, and I don't mind. I don't necessarily want to be paid myself, but I think in order to attract moving forward the type of people that I've done this job long enough, and I've seen others do it, where I know what type of candidates and what type of people it attracts to do it. And it is a lot of work. It is a part-time job that only pays $17,000 a year, and you cannot do the job adequately if you are raising a family or working. Yet those voices are important to have in city government.
Ardy, are you advocating to make it a full-time paid position as a council person?
I think it needs to be either full-time or it needs to be paid more. And unfortunately, the only way that can change is with the public voting to do that. And I do believe that, in life, you get what you pay for. So if we are able to pay council staff people more and have them have the supportive staff that other big cities have, then we will be better servants to the public. And additionally, I would like to see the city cut up into districts. I'd like to see 7 districts, 5 districts, and 2 at-large seats, which would give the people a louder voice in various neighborhoods to be heard at City Hall and feel a more direct connection to their elected officials. Glendale is now over 100 years old. It was established in 1906. That's when it was incorporated. And yet the structure of governance that we have today is the same structure that we had when the population of Glendale was 1/10 of the size it is today. So we're a big city. We should approach our issues in a big city way and and work in such a way where we empower neighborhoods and give local residents a voice and let them understand how they can have a greater role in how the decisions are made in the city.
And to note, the geography of the city of Glendale is amazing. It's got these mountain ranges, these hills, these valleys, a river runs through it. Just an amazing place.
By the way, we also have vast areas of open space in the mountains. Mm-hmm. And I was just telling someone the other day, I think we're one of only 3 or 4 major cities in the world that have a big cats living within its borders, right? Yeah. We have mountain lions and we have bears.
P22 is
coyotes.
Here.
Yes. We had Meatball the bear. I mean, it is truly amazing. The other day I was at Verdugo Park, and at night you can see bats flying around and owls and all the things that make this such a special place nestled in between the Verdugo and San Gabriel Mountains.
One of the things that has attracted me to Glendale is actually the hiking in the mountains. It's just wonderful, and I take advantage of it. You mentioned a couple of priorities that I think I just want to touch on. You said open spaces, basically parks, and the safe and clean aspect. I just want to know, because, you know, Glendale is one of the safest places to live in the whole country, and we do have all these open parks and stuff. Why is it difficult to maintain those? They are priorities as in maintaining or advancing the case? Are there proponents and detractors? Are there people who say we want less space, and why would they do that?
Well, there's no one that wants less space. Everyone wants more open space. They want more green space. The problem is how and where we can allocate those resources. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you live in the southern portion of the city, which is where I grew up and where I went to school, you know, when the closest park to us was the closest large park to us was probably Verdugo Park. Yeah. And we lived not that far from where the Whole Foods is today. We lived in an apartment complex, which I affectionately refer to as the Noah's Ark of immigrants. Every immigrant group 2 by 2 loaded up into this massive complex from all over the globe. We had everything from people from Cuba to Korea to Armenia to Syrians, you name it. And, you know, when we wanted to go out and play as children, first of all, we were able to back then ride our bikes on city streets or on sidewalks, which I would not allow my child nor recommend anyone else's child to do today. So we have to address traffic and mobility issues, which is also a priority for me, along with public safety and cleanliness. But we would walk up to Ardy White Elementary School, which was the elementary school I attended. Mm-hmm. And we would either go under the fence or over the fence that was locked to be able to play basketball or soccer or baseball or whatever it is that we wanted to do. So essentially, we were trespassing and becoming criminals just for the simple thing that all kids want to do, which is to have open space to play in. The other alternative was to play in the courtyard of our massive apartment complex, which we did as well. And that did not benefit anyone. I can tell you right now, the neighbors were never too happy to have a horde of marauding kids running through it, especially when you're working maybe 2 jobs to pay your rent or to save up enough money to when they purchase a house and this group of 12 kids is running around being kids. So yeah. I think that, you know, we have the space available, but we have these schools chained up behind chain link fences, which there's really no reason. They are public assets. They may be run by the schools, but I think that we can come up with cooperative agreements that would open them up for passive use and reimagine them with green spaces and grass and benches and just play. Something happens to the human soul and mind when you are able to step out of the 4 walls of your home, get into a place with some more natural flora and just contemplate, you know. Mm-hmm. I don't know, just look at your surroundings. I mean, so many places in the world, in Europe, certainly in Armenia, have these types of amenities. We see, so those who are familiar with Glendale will immediately know which park I'm referring to. There's a park called Wilson Mini Park, mm-hmm. and it's not that far from City Hall. It has about maybe 4 picnic tables, a small play area. It is that public park is probably the size of a postage stamp. Yet, yes. If you go there at any hour of the day, all those tables are taken up by older men and some women who just sit there and they converse and they talk and they congregate while the kids play. And that is wonderful. And we need more of that, right?
Is that the one on Adams and Wilson?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Precisely. See, you know exactly which one it is because it is like Maple Park, like Palmer. A lot of these parks are become places of congregation for these people who live in apartment complexes. And I think we need more of that. We need to give people those opportunities, and we should do a better job of utilizing our public spaces.
Before I moved out of Glendale, I was more of a Fremont Park guy. So
one of my favorite parks.
Yeah.
One of my favorite parks. And we're, by the way, about to renovate it. So hopefully when you're back, Hovik, you'll get a chance to look at it. I've been fighting for the renovation of that park for a long time.
Fremont is a lovely park,
Nice.
yeah. And Verdugo is a great park as well. It has
Our
gorgeous trees.
Our parks are, all our parks are wonderful. All our parks are wonderful. In fact, we just marked Parks and Recreation Department. We issued a proclamation yesterday, declaring this month as Parks Month. We have, by the way, concerts in the park now, both at Brand Library and also at Verdugo Park. But this year, the Civic Plaza, if any of you have ever seen Civic Plaza, there's a number of gatherings that happen there. I know the UIA does an April 23rd candlelight vigil. I think the local ARF does their May 28th Independence Day or First Republic Day celebrations there. There was a lot of rallies there a couple of years ago following what was happening in Armenia. And so given all of those gatherings that happened, we just thought to ourselves, why aren't we doing more with this space? And now this summer, for the first time, we're doing concerts in that plaza in the evenings. And I think it's a great location. Hopefully it'll be successful and people will come out. But we have a lot of cool things happening in our parks and open spaces.
Ardy, let's talk about the city elections last month in June. You were not up for re-election because you're in the middle of your first term as a Glendale City Councilman. But Ardy Najaryan was re-elected. Vrej Aghajanian was not re-elected. Instead, Glendale voted in for Elen Asadrian. We should also mention that Dan Brotman was elected to City Council. Glendale is roughly 50% Armenian, and usually the City Council has an Armenian representation of 2 or 3 council people, so we are adequately represented, I think. What does Asadrian's election mean for the Armenian community here?
I think for the Armenian community specifically, I think it's significant because Ellen becomes the second quote-unquote Hayastansi elected to City Council, the first one being Zaris Sinanyan. Prior to that, you've had Rafi Manukyan, who I believe was born in Lebanon. You've had Ardy Najaryan, who I think was US born. I think Ara's family is from Cleveland, Ohio. You had Bob Yusefian, Larry Zaryan, Vartan Garpetian, and Vrej Aghajanian, who were Armenians from Iran. I myself was born in Boston. I don't know if I mentioned that, but you heard earlier what my family roots are. So I think Elen Asadrian's election in terms of a Hayastansi presence, and given how many Hayastansi Armenians there are in Glendale, and Hayastansi, for anyone who is listening to this for the first time, are Armenians from the Republic of Armenia or the former Soviet Republic of Armenia, is significant. Also, the fact that she's the first Armenian woman on City Council, there's some significance because there have been others who have made efforts to try and be elected, women candidates, Armenian women candidates who've been unsuccessful. And I think that also is important for the community, and hopefully she is not the last one that does that. So those are, I think, in terms of what it means for Glendale, honestly, time is going to tell because it's not about any singular individual. Councilmember Dan Brotman, who was reelected and received the most votes out of anyone who I had endorsed for his reelection, has shown where his views and his priorities lie. So he's more or less somewhat of a known commodity to the voters because he had 2 years to demonstrate what he can do and what his agenda is. Ardy Najaryan is the longest serving member of the current council who was reelected. The votes
about 15, 16 years, yeah.
Yeah, 15, 16 years. In fact, he was elected to council the same year I was elected to city clerk when I was 27. But he actually had 2 years prior service on the Community College Board of Trustees in Glendale. And he was also a member of the Transportation and Parking Commission in the city of Glendale. Currently, he's also the chair of Metrolink, which is the largest rail connector network in the region. and he is part of that because of his membership on the MTA board, Metropolitan Transit Authority. So all of these, it's at various times, and of course the member I haven't mentioned yet, Paula Devine, who is a former commissioner of the Commission on the Status of Women, has been on the council for a number of years already. And I should also mention that we now have term limits. So I'm serving my first term. If I'm fortunate enough to earn the vote of the voters of Glendale moving forward, I'll be allowed to serve 8 more years if I continue to be reelected. But that's it. And then after 12 years, you cannot run again.
So it's two terms, right?
Yeah. What was interesting in this last election is that it's 3 4-year terms. And what happened in this last election is that 𝐀𝐫𝐝𝐚𝐬𝐀𝐫𝐝𝐲 𝐊𝐚𝐬𝐬𝐃𝐫𝐝 who had been elected to council, who received an extra year of service partially because of the restructuring of the election cycle, which afforded each council person or every elected official an additional, I want to say, almost 10 or 11 months. Maybe it was a little bit more because we consolidated our elections with statewide run elections. Before, you would vote for elections in Glendale or for council members every April of odd numbered years. Because the turnout was, according to Sacramento policymakers, too low, they said any city that has a voter turnout of less than 25% must consolidate their elections with statewide elections, so either a primary or a general. Most chose to consolidate their elections with a November general election. Glendale chose to align it with the primary date because the March date is closer to the previous April date. There was a lot of reasons for that besides the closeness of the date. It was interesting to see that how the votes turned out. And this election cycle, 𝐁𝐫𝐝𝐚𝐬𝐃𝐫𝐝 unfortunately was not successful in keeping his seat. But I believe change is good. Progress is good. We have a more, at least, diverse council as far as gender representation, which is, I think, important. And we are going to see how it works out.
Quick question about Ara, actually. He just became the chairman of the LA Metro Board. Can you tell us how important that is for LA, Glendale, our community?
Yeah. I think it's very important for Glendale to have a voice. The Metro, the seat that he holds is voted on by all the local jurisdictions represented in that area. And so it's not just a given that Glendale would have a seat on that board. You have to fight for it. It was one of the things that he did early on in his political career, secured that seat and has remained on that seat since. And why it's important is because Glendale is overlooked when we look at regional transportation needs. I think thanks to his work and leadership, I may disagree with Ara on other issues ideologically. He leans more right. I lean more left. Mm-hmm. I think at various times we both lean to the center, but having him as Glendale's voice on Metro is critical for making sure that Glendale is not overlooked and that we have these projects that come to Glendale. 𝐀𝐫𝐝𝐿, which is, by the way, a very popular program where they shut down major Los Angeles areas and streets and open it only to pedestrians and bicyclists, has come to Glendale twice, and it's in no small part to the work and the funds that he pursued to secure for Glendale.
Yeah, it's definitely not an overnight thing. He's been involved with it for a very long time.
For our listeners, I want to say we've divided this. The first half is going to be about U.S. stuff, and we're going to go more into Armenian-American and Armenia-related stuff in the second half. But Ardy, since you mentioned that you lean left, the nation's, I guess, midterm elections are coming up. And I think it looks really bad for Democrats. What is your outlook on the midterm elections?
So here's what I would say about that. We can assume that it does, but let's also remember that when the president is usually of the same party as whoever controls the House, in the midterm, the ruling presidential party hardly ever retains control of the House during the midterms. It's almost a reaction to all of the heightened expectations that people had of the new presidency. And so it wouldn't be uncommon for people to react, especially with high gas prices and which is ironic because with the prevalence of electric cars and the number of, with the kind of the zeitgeist being what it is with climate change, gas prices are less of a factor than they were 10 years ago on the overall economic health of the country. It's not that they're completely irrelevant, but the influence and power of oil prices has diminished over the years and will continue to diminish as the America and others seek more energy independence and less reliance on fossil fuels. But in terms of what the future holds for the Democratic Party, I will tell you, look, there's a couple of things that we should note. That the difference in seats in the House of Representatives between Republicans and Democrats, I think is what, 8 or 9 seats. Someone can go online and I think check this. It's the narrowest it has ever been. To say that Democrats have comfortable control over Congress. And I remember back when it used to be 35 seats and people would say, oh my God, this is very narrow. And now it's even less. And so rather than saying that either party will control the House decisively, especially when you look at the Senate, even more so there, and when you look at presidential election outcomes, we are seeing a country that is seemingly ideologically divided between Republican and Democrat. But I think that there are some other deeper issues and causes for that as well. The largest and fastest growing party affiliation is no party affiliation when people register to vote. These old school of a bygone era party loyalist kind of approaches to partisan voting are less significant now, but the ideological differences are as pronounced as they've ever been, right? We see that with the Supreme Court decisions. We see that with issues related to former President Donald Trump and the January 6 hearings. Of course, he was the only president ever impeached twice. The country is definitely going to a place where it's kind of 50-50. I'm not really sure how I feel about that because I think it doesn't necessarily do anything to help us move forward and really try and understand each other better as a nation.
Assuming that the Democrats will lose the House and or the Senate, it's going to become a lot more difficult for Biden to continue with his agenda for this administration. What kind of a future do you see for Build Back Better and other plans, especially for the Green New Deal kind of things?
We saw a Supreme Court case come out against EPA regulations limiting what the EPA can do. You're seeing Roe v. Wade overturned.
EPA versus West Virginia, I think it was, right?
And yes, and I think look, I'll tell you this much. I think that truly what governs and determines the future of the country more than who we elect for president is who's in the Supreme Court. And right now we are looking at, no matter who is the president and no matter who people fear may become the president or who they hope will become the president, that person and the legislature is going to have to grapple with a very conservative Supreme Court. And it's not something I actually would like to see a more balanced Supreme Court, perhaps a difference of 1, maybe 2 seats between the conservative justices and the more liberal justices. But right now it's decisively conservative. That's good if you're a conservative and that's what you're hoping for. But, I see it having a very long-term negative impact on the country on a number of issues that we had made some progress on, including the environmental issues. But so we shall see. I don't know. I think that nowadays, what pains me the most is that how the media covers elections, the lack of civics that's taught in schools, how political races have become almost like we're following sports competitions, right? The red jersey versus blue jersey. And there isn't really a thoughtful approach as to how our decisions and the candidates we elect impact our overall quality of life and the position of America, the United States, on the global stage. Despite voter participation, many Americans are very much checked out. And look, I'll give you one example of it, right? Look at how many wars and how much death happens across the globe on any given day. Yet if the media decides to cover one very closely, that garners the most attention and others don't.
Right.
You know, in a cynical way, who after all today speaks of what happened in Artsakh, or who after all today speaks of what's happening in Tigray and Ethiopia. Yet Ukraine, I mean, go on your social media feed, and what's happening in Ukraine is a terrible tragedy, but you know, you will see people flaunting the Ukrainian flag on their profiles, feeling as though they're doing actually something substantive to bring about global peace. It's somewhat, I can speak very cynically about this for a long time, but I don't think your listeners are interested in that.
Well, I'm interested in just a little more. You mentioned the 50-50 Congress, you know, and it's very difficult to get anything done, but it seems like there's constant bipartisan agreement to throw taxpayer money overseas. They've sent approximately, what, 50 billion to aid Ukraine with the war and other things. For personally, as a taxpayer in the United States, I'm very frustrated with that. We can't get any help for people, homeless, whatever. You name a plethora of issues that we have here domestically, and we can't agree to give any kind of aid because one party wants it, the other party doesn't want it, and yet both parties agree to send Ukraine $50 billion. Why? I mean, do you agree with the Ukraine policy that Biden is pursuing currently?
You know, I do think that he handled it as best he could. I don't know enough about the specifics of what Congress has allowed. You know, I think that we get bogged down in this. Well, they sent 50 billion could be spent better here. In general, I can tell you that I'm someone who supports more investments in domestic infrastructure, in our schools, in our social programs here in the United States versus building up military might across the globe. I think that even within our military, we need to support our service men and women far better than we have when we see what type of conditions veterans return home from these ill-begotten conflicts that we send them into without thinking twice. But in terms of Ukraine policy specifically, I will tell you this much, that I would like to see it come to a peaceful resolution and conclusion. I would like to see the two greatest superpowers in the world with nuclear capability to destroy the globe many times over find common ground and a way of resolving their differences versus this kind of lukewarm, if not cold war that's happening.
That's a great sentiment, Ardy, and easier said than done. And I would love to talk a little more about it, but let's go to more topics that concern Armenian Americans and Armenians in general. Ardy, you and I grew up in an era where I think Armenian-American political advocacy was on the rise. You know, whether it was participating in these protests, volunteering, all these different telethons and organizing our communities. I remember those times fondly. So I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts about the evolution of political advocacy of Armenian American citizens? Many times we, I think, express pride and say that Armenian Americans are the second largest politically active diaspora after Israel. But is that comparison correct or even helpful? For instance, before the 44-day war, there were signs that there were many gaps between U.S. foreign policy and Armenian political advocacy. There was some critique already back then, such as the immense amount of military aid that was being supplied to Azerbaijan despite Section 97. What would be, I guess, some constructive criticism you can offer about Armenian American advocacy, both past and present?
So that's very, very, there's a lot to go through there and address, because you brought up some very good points. I don't know if it warrants mentioning. I'll just say it anyways, because I think, if anyone's listening to me make the comments I'm about to make, will say, what does he know? But, as you both know, I worked for the Armenian National Committee of America Western Region offices as their government relations director for many years, and as their executive director for a brief time. And then prior to that, I had worked in the Armenian Assembly of America in Washington, D.C., running the internship program and having been a participant in their internship and having interned on Capitol Hill for both Republican and Democratic members of Congress. So I still maintain my relationships in various political circles, both within the Armenian community and in the American political spheres to this day. I consider Congressman Frank Pallone from New Jersey a friend and mentor. I interned for his office in Washington, D.C. and learned so much from him. And as you know, he's the founder and co-chair of the Armenian Issues Caucus. And I consider Congressman Adam Schiff a friend as well, who represents us here, having worked on his first congressional campaign. So let's talk about the comparison between us and the Israeli lobby or advocacy groups. Sure, I think that we're probably still the second most active, but that gap between first and second, I think, when we say that, it almost makes people think like the gap is a lot
that they're
closer
comparable.
than it actually is. Yeah. But, when you look at other countries or other groups, even at times the Greek lobby, who I've worked with very closely, the Hellenic American Council and others, look at the Armenian lobby with envy in terms of how we're able to mobilize. Maybe it's because of our size, how nimble we are, how committed we are, how proud we are of our heritage. But, other groups, I remember, so I'll give you one example. When after 9/11, when I believe Ashcroft was Attorney General and under George W. Bush, there was this list of countries of which the nationals were going to be selected and given extra scrutiny versus any other country, right? And it was a list that included countries like North Korea, Iran, Iraq. I'm not sure which other Middle Eastern countries are on it. And then all of a sudden, and North Korea is not a Middle Eastern country, but North Korea, for obvious, I think, reasons in
old axis of
politics.
evil stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then all of a sudden, like sticking out like a sore thumb in the middle of this list was Armenia. And we were all caught off guard. At the time I was working at the Armenian National Committee, and we quickly mobilized between our Washington, D.C. offices and our network of Armenian organizations here. We peppered and bombarded the White House fax lines and emails with grassroots. At that time, those automated emails as well as individual emails to the point where I think the White House fax machine was not able to withstand the volume of emails and faxes coming through. And it opened up the doors for us to have a conversation and to find out what was happening. There were all sorts of weird theories at the time that, it was supposed to be another country. It was supposed to be, Albania, and it turned out to be Armenia. I have a more, again, cynical opinion as to how Armenia ended up on that list. But Armenia was taken off that list because of the activism. What happened at that time, the reason I say this in context of what we're talking about, is that when we were successful in doing that, a number of Iranian groups called us, Iranian-American groups, and kept asking us, what is it that you did? Tell us, explain to us what your secret was, right? And, we had this, it was interesting, the perception that they had of the success and how we were able to do it. Obviously, they think that we're a far more mobilized, organized entity than we maybe actually are. I think that there's truth on both sides. Are we organized more than some? Yes. Are we as well organized as others? Probably not. There's a lot of diversity in the types of lobbying groups, interest groups that are trying to gain influence in Washington, D.C. When it comes to foreign policy, I think Armenians have done relatively well, but we have to realize that we're up against some massive, massive global forces. The fossil fuel industry is one, right? Oil and gas lobbyists are huge, and they have the amount of dollars they spend just on lobbying Washington alone on their interests probably dwarfs the entire military budget of the Republic of Armenia.
Ardy, you mentioned those things, but do you think that our tactics, techniques, and procedures, if I may use that term, are congruent with the challenges that we have today? For instance, I can recall that there were some U.S. parts included in Bayraktars, and we only found out about it after the war. We know that the ANC, for instance, campaigned actively against Dr. Oz. The reality is he still won. Then we also have the issue of F-16s to Turkey. What do you think can be done more than what we're doing today, or should we just sort of accept that that those are the forces that we're against?
It's we have to we have to play the hand that we're dealt. And I think that sometimes we think of ourselves as being greater than we are as a nation, as a people. We're only 10 million people worldwide, and that's including my friends, the Kardashians and the Agassiz and the, you name it, right? We include all the folks who may even have a quarter Armenian or 1/64th Armenian blood in them, like Princess Diana, and we're still only 10 million, maybe 11 million worldwide. And when you look at the population of LA County alone, Hovik, it's 12 million, right? So there's more people living in LA County than there are in this just one part of the United States than there are Armenians all over the globe, scattered in every country. So we're small. B, we're limited in our resources compared to the adversary. So this is a true David and Goliath struggle. Finally, I would say that we have to figure out, we have to be cognizant and aware of our own deficiencies and character flaws, and figure out how to survive and thrive in spite of ourselves. And I say this because I've read a lot of history. I studied history. I've read enough history, and when you read Armenian history, it feels like you're standing and sitting in an echo chamber, and the same mistakes continue to repeat themselves. And I'm not just talking about 50 years or 100 years or pre-genocide. I'm talking about 800 years, right? I'm talking about thousands of years. You read Moses Khorenatzi's last chapter in his Askabadum, The Lamentation of Armenia, and the way he describes the culture of the Armenian nobility and the church leadership, and generally the people that they're odaramol, nutabasht, sellouts, non-spiritual, and you're like, oh my goodness, like, is this written in about 2022 or 2010, or is it written in the time that he wrote it? So something perhaps
1100 years ago.
Yeah, I think we need to look at how do we use our weaknesses as strengths, and we certainly have in the past. The fact that we're fractured, I mean, all this, whenever I hear, there's two quotes that make me sometimes cringe, even though I respect and admire the people who spoke them. One is that William Saroyan quote that has been overquoted about two Armenians creating New Armenia. The other is the 𝐀𝐫𝐝𝐻 𝐀𝐫𝐝𝐻. We have to figure out, okay, let's assume we're going to perpetually be divided. How do we use that as a strength, or how do we succeed with that despite being our handicap? So the Bayraktar issue, right, or any of these other issues that you bring up, it's very hard. I mean, we have, if you know as well as I do how many individual positions and staff people there are in the quote unquote two lobbying arms, or the two advocacy organizations advocating for Armenians in Washington, D.C.
But that's my question. Maybe why aren't there more?
Well, I mean, resources. It's all about resources. And here's the thing, even if we doubled it, that's like upgrading from a machine gun to a howitzer when your opponents still have a B-52 bomber, right? I mean, okay, let's assume we even triple it. Like, the question becomes, it's about working smarter, not harder. And so one of those is, making sure more Armenians are running for Armenian-Americans are running for public office, that we're more integrated into the American cultural political zeitgeist, and participating in the debates that are not exclusively Armenian. And again, the question becomes, do we have the resources to do that? I've been seemingly, at least on the surface, how involved I was on Armenian issues in college and right after college for a long period of time. But since becoming city clerk and since assuming the office of a council member and now mayor, I've been a little disassociated, because look, I have only enough hours in the day to deal with pothole issues and trash pickup, and making sure that regionally Glendale is getting its fair share of federal grant monies for various programs. And then you layer on top of that the constant body blows and right hooks and uppercuts that the Armenian nation receives, whether it's in Artsakh or in Syria, in Aleppo, or in Lebanon with the explode. I mean, it's one after another. And so you start struggling and saying, where do you put your resources? How do you garner enough time in the day to do things? I mean, this is something that each of you struggles with, because you're doing obviously this podcast. I know Asbed has struggled with. because he's single-handedly, with the help of a committed few, created one of the greatest Armenian news networks, unbiased, by the way, because you provide access to all information. I don't know. I mean, Hovik, I don't know. I will tell you this. The key to it is, one of the keys to it is coalition building, approaching our challenges in an Ocean's 11 type mentality. If anyone knows the reference to those movies, like, it's about getting the right people with the right skills to come together for a specific task. So I'll give you one example of a success we had when I was at the Armenian National Committee, and maybe it needs to be replicated in other ways. Turkey at the time was trying to establish better trade agreements with the United States to bring in steel and cotton from Turkey without any tariffs or US restrictions. And it seemed like a fait accompli. It seemed like it was a done deal. So everyone had thrown up their arms and given up on it. But obviously, we did not want to allow Turkey to be able to bolster up its economy even more, where they can use the funds and resources from it to obviously build the weapons of mass destruction, oppression, and execution that they have since.
At taxpayer expense here in the U.S.
At taxpayer and consumer expenses, right? So we fought that, and we were the only people fighting it at first. You know, we started lobbying, raising awareness, using what allies and friends we had and relationships we had to slow down the progress of that bill. And then the progress of that bill, we were successful enough to slow down enough where the Greek lobby joined us. Then, most importantly, the cotton manufacturers, the cotton industry joined us, and the US steel workers joined us. And then we were successful in completely stopping that agreement from moving forward. So to use, I don't know if you like American football or if anyone watches American football, but sometimes when there's a kickoff, the kicker on the team is usually the thinnest or smallest person. They have great range with their foot, but they're small players in comparison to some of the juggernauts that play on an American football team. But they'll kick the football, and the person on the opposing team catches the ball and has to return it to the end zone to score. And that person is usually the fastest, nimblest person, right? So imagine the bill and the ball being that nimble, fast person. It was in the hands of a person, and it had made it past all the defenders and now was running for the end zone with no one except the kicker and that individual between them and the end zone. So Armenia is the kicker, right? And this is an analogy that Armand Paryan and others have used as well. So I'll give credit to him. And sometimes when you watch American football, that kicker doesn't give up. They can give up and say, hey, look, I'm never going to stop this fast, much larger player than me. But sometimes, just sometimes, that kicker hangs on to either a piece of the jersey or an ankle of that player and slows them down enough where the bigger teammates are able to catch up and tackle the opponent before they get to the end zone.
Yeah, it's all about coalition making and knowing your allied interests, basically.
Yeah, and so, and like in any other scenario, Asbed, the steel workers and the cotton manufacturers would have never collaborated with the Armenian-American advocacy orgs, right? But on this one, they did. So again, that Ocean's 11 American football analogy, figure out who your allies are going to be on what issue, work with them. And then, you know, the harder part of this is, Hovik, and this is where the challenge comes in. You know, you defeat a bill once, you can't rest on your laurels. How do we ensure that we educate our public officials enough where that issue doesn't come back in 2 years or in another Congress or with some?
Well, we have this issue every year, just about, with the 907 waiver.
Yep.
Ardy, you were talking about Turkey and these issues. As you know, Armenia is having a normalization process. Let me start that over. As you know, Turkey and Armenia are conducting some negotiations in the initiative they call the so-called normalization process. What is your view of this process between the two countries?
I was having coffee with a friend this morning, and we were talking about this. And my concern and my fear is that I don't know how normalization of relations can occur when the person that you're trying to quote unquote normalize relations with has taken no ownership or responsibility over the trauma and that has inflicted upon you. Turkey is an unrepentant country that flaunts its murder of Armenians doesn't now just deny it. Its leaders, its people in top positions will say things like they deserved it or we'll teach you those lessons again.
Or Ardy, one more thing. They've even said that they will finish the job they started 100 years ago.
Yeah, just to clarify, just to echo Asbed, it's not an issue of, it's not no longer an issue that they can say, you know, this is a 100-year-old history. 2 years ago, again, they had an active role in Artsakh. So
absolutely. So I think that I don't know why the people in Yerevan and some individuals feel that they must go through with these types of negotiations, why there hasn't been more efforts to coalition build with those entities. And I see that, you know, I also read in the news that there's some sort of cooperative effort between Cyprus and Greece and Armenia militarily, et cetera. I mean, the reality is you're going to need more than Cyprus and Greece. You're going to have to expand. I don't want to armchair quarterback the Armenia's foreign policy, but I can tell you as an Armenian-American, as a descendant of survivors of the genocide, as someone who tries to maintain ties with people in Armenia, individuals, and tries to follow as best I can what's going on, it is troubling because even if we were to assume that everything turns out well with this, depending, you know, whatever your definition of well is, I cannot imagine that 50 or 100 or 500 years from now, that relationship will continue in a way where Armenia continues to exist next to Turkey and Azerbaijan. I just don't see that.
Here's an argument that is brought up frequently. You know, we're neighbors. We should talk. We should have some kind of relations. Even Russia and Ukraine, in the midst of the war, have relations. So what is your answer to that argument? So why not, you know, just, you know, open up the border?
I don't know what opening up the border means because, from my understanding, there's still a lot of. I mean, you can go into any store or a lot of stores in Armenia, and there were plenty of Turkish goods that were on the shelves. Somehow they're getting into the country. There's also talk of people who travel or move between the two countries, however they do it. I mean, this idea that the border closure, let's be very clear, was initiated by the Republic of Turkey in clear violation of US law and international law after the independence of Armenia from the Soviet Union. They stopped all the transport of humanitarian aid, and they're obviously using a power play to try and get Armenia to cower. And, you know, I think by doing this, you're showing them that this tactic worked. Now, I don't know what the alternatives are, and I'm sure you'll have guests on that will speak more authoritatively with better ideas. It is a difficult position. I don't know what I would do. Even when we're talking about the national issues, like, it's tough.
Ardy, we're talking about Armenia. They have a consulate here in Glendale, and they also have the embassy in Washington, D.C. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the consulate here, especially since a consul who was very well regarded, Armen Bayburtian, I think, left? How's your relationship with them as a mayor and as a councilman?
As a council person, as a resident of the city, as an individual, I've always maintained very professional, very warm and cordial relationship with the consular staff. They are professionals trained in the Foreign Service and have been given an assignment, a very important assignment here in Los Angeles. And as a city official who is host to the consulate, which is, you know, akin to having kind of sovereign Armenian soil within the borders of your
of Glendale
city.
Yeah.
We are obligated to do our best to make sure that they are safe, secure, that they are able to do their jobs. And there are various projects in which we collaborate with Hayastan, you know, both from the city in terms of with our sister cities and equipment that we send to them or training that has happened in the past. So we've always had good relationships, but good relationships doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to what's happening. And at various times, I've had very frank discussions with them within the context that, you know, I'm an American citizen of Armenian descent, but, you know, in comparing some of the things that happen in Armenia, especially with governance, especially some of the rules or laws that were passed in parliament, I've raised issues with it, both with the current ruling party and coalition in Armenia, as well as the previous ones.
And what about the embassy in Washington, D.C. and the ambassador, Lilith Maguns?
I have not had a chance to speak to her. I know that she was here in California visiting. I don't know whom, because there was no request made to meet with anyone at the city, and I did not go out of my way to try and meet her either.
Okay, interesting.
By the way, I just want to say that, look, I mean, I will always, as a public official, I will speak with anyone and everyone. I will give them the time to express themselves. I'm a firm believer of free speech and people's right to express themselves. And I try to treat everyone with a modicum of respect and dignity. That doesn't mean I have to agree with them. I have very strong opinions. Sometimes my wife will remind me my opinions are a little too strong. But I will, give people the opportunity to say what they need to say, but I will also say what I feel I need to say and express my opinions as well.
Ardy, our former mayor, Zare Sinanian, resigned, of course, from the council and moved to Yerevan. Let's just, just to tell everybody, all three of us on this show have known Zare for decades here. Mm-hmm. How has the relationship of the Glendale Armenians changed with the city council since he left? Have you seen any kind of a change in that arena?
I think that, at the time Zara was here, or the High Commissioner of Diaspora, Sinanian, was here, and when he left, or when he was about to leave, mm-hmm. It was a different time. There was this kind of activism and excitement by many Armenians, whether they were from Glendale or they would come to Glendale to participate in rallies and demonstrations.
You're talking about 2018, right?
Yeah, precisely around that time. And so I think that, if your question is there that level of interest or activism, the answer is no. But you got to keep in mind that was a different time. It was a different issue. Mm-hmm. You did see that type of interest in activism during the war, as people mobilized. I would say, in fact, at that time, you saw greater unity among the Armenian people, which was, despite the unfortunate circumstances, what brought it about. It was very encouraging, very inspiring, and quite honestly, as heartbroken as we were and as tired as we were going through those that month and a half long period, it was probably the most inspired I've been and hopeful about our collective efforts. And then that went away, Asbed. So I don't know if the engagement level. I don't think the engagement level has changed much. It has certainly decreased, but I don't think it's because Zara Sinanian, Mr. Sinanian, is no longer here. I think part of it is the fact that COVID made everyone kind of withdraw and could be more worried about self-preservation than collective activism. And we have yet to, and even though the war wasn't able to dampen that, it was because of the war that people came together. I think people have now reverted back to that kind of self-preservation mode and are dealing with all the various stages of grief after that, including denial, including withdrawal, etc.
Let me tell you my personal opinion about Zare. I've known him for decades, but I've expressed it separately on social media. I don't want to go into that. I think a lot of Armenians have, but there are some statements specifically concerning the diaspora that have been, that Zare Sinanian has mentioned, such as, there needs to be a new diaspora. And I think the official policy, at least that's how I interpret it, of the Armenian government, is to foster dialogue with some of these, the Armenian government claims that 95%, for instance, of the Armenian diaspora is not represented by the three traditional parties, and therefore we should focus on building engagement with those non-partisan groups. And it's kind of nebulous how they'll do it. Like when Zara Sinanian was here, he, I think, showed a preference for meeting with individuals and either boycotted the meetings with the traditional Armenian parties, such as at least the ARF, or the latter boycotted him. I don't know which one is true. What do you think about this strategy of the Armenian government as executed by Zara Sinanian?
So I think that if I can't speak to the strategy of the Armenian government because I don't know if that was an official policy decision, if it was just circumstances, if there was an unwillingness from both sides to not meet and engage. I can tell you that I think not engaging in general is not good for the health of our community, especially coming out of a war, especially while decisions are being made that are going to impact the long-term security and health and viability of the country. I will only say that without a diaspora, it is very hard to imagine. Without the engagement of the diaspora, all parts of it, it is very hard to imagine the success and the vitality of the Armenian nation, as well as on the Armenian homeland, both those parts of it that are independent and those parts of it that are occupied. And it is hard to imagine the diaspora without Armenia and Armenia without the diaspora. It's a two-way street. But this is not something new to this administration. Look, it's very easy to find one individual. And I think too often times we find an individual and we will say that this individual is the reason why we are dissatisfied with everything, whether it's within a certain branch of the government or the government itself. I think that, as I said before, we need to look within ourselves as well, because the problems that we're seeing, and again, Hovik, you've read history as well as I have, and these problems continue to occur over and over and over again. I deal with my own set of issues with the Armenian population here in Glendale, and we can go into that, not the least of which was this kind of skepticism about the COVID vaccine and still trying to convince Armenians to do what's in their best interest. But I get where you're getting at. It's just hard for me to comment on because I do wear my official hat as a mayor and council member. And the only thing I will speak to is saying that there needs to be continuous communication. And I do think it's important to include the traditional organizations, not because of the political parties that they represent that people in Armenia may agree or disagree with, but the preservation of Armenian culture and heritage and language and spirit in the diaspora is inseparable from the work that these organizations have done over the last decades here in the United States. And to not meet with anyone minimizes their importance and their role.
But what I'm not hearing, Ardy, is that the fact that Zare was a council person and also mayor of Glendale, and now he's the High Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs in Yerevan, has not created any additional synergies for the connection of the two communities, like the Glendale Armenian, the Diaspora Armenians, and the homeland. I was hoping to hear a little more about that, but doesn't sound like
look, I will tell you that he may have, right? There is some programs that are, if we were, I will tell you that I think that if we were to just focus on that, there is work being done in that office to try and build relationships. But I think that certainly a lot more can be done given the vast amount of resources that are available to the Armenian nation and to the Republic of Armenia here in Southern California. I think that right now what you're seeing is a lot of kind of mercenary type work, a lot of individual efforts, groups. Someone did an assessment of how many GoFundMe pages there were to support efforts in Artsakh and Armenia, and God knows where those monies are going or if they're even reaching their intended recipients and sources. I think that it's a lot of chaos. It's a little bit like the Wild West. One of the reasons why I think that it's important for both the Diaspora Affairs Department as well as the Republic of Armenia to directly interface with these organizations is because they have a successful track record, right? They've built schools, they've built churches, they've built community centers, they've established institutions that have lasted through good times and bad and continue to last. So, and they helped the homeland right after independence. So to then rely on a lot of the newer groups, not to ignore them, but to say, okay, well, how can we all work together? There's this interesting trend where people, I feel like nowadays, if they have money, they feel like they can create a new entity to do something that they feel needs to be done, and becomes somewhat of a hobby horse. Sometimes it'll be successful, sometimes it won't. I don't know. I don't foresee the lasting power in a lot of these initiatives. Whereas I think the traditional organizations, whether you like them or not, have demonstrated that they are able to survive.
Okay. I know you have had to wear as mayor of Glendale, and I know you represent a lot of people from different political viewpoints, but I have to ask you for your own, maybe honest and personal opinion about what happened since November 2020. What are your thoughts about the Artsakh war, the government in Armenia, and the current efforts of the opposition, or I would say the resistance movement in Armenia, the protests and so forth? What are your thoughts on this, on these developments?
The war and what transpired was probably the greatest trauma that I've experienced as an adult in my lifetime. I think that the images and stories and fallout from it still continue to haunt me. I mean, I don't think a week goes by that I don't think about what has happened or the individuals that are still enduring the hardships. As you know, as soon as I became mayor, I brought forth an initiative to create a sister city relationship with the city of Marduni in Artsakh, in part to try and bolster the spirit of the people who are still having to live there within the scopes of Azeri snipers and soldiers. I think that, there's a lot of things that we need to assess. There was a lot of talk coming out of that war of, oh, there was betrayal. Oh, these folks were at fault, or this is why it happened. And yet, it doesn't seem like there's been an honest accounting of why there were failures in the strategic defense efforts to defend Artsakh from invasion and attack. If I'm wrong, please educate and enlighten me on that. But
there is no good accounting.
So I consume most of I should say that my access to information is limited, because even though I am able to read Armenian, most of the news I consume is consumed in the English language. So there may be other sources out there that I'm missing, and certainly anyone is welcome to translate and provide me counters to this. But I can tell you, as an Armenian-American, the information, including during the war, coming out of official channels was not reliable and disappointing, and even furthered that disappointment, or deepened that sense of disappointment and trauma afterwards. Number one. Number two, I think that what happened since, where we have hostages in Baku, or we think they're in Baku, God knows where they are. We have still unaccounted POWs or MIA, missing in action individuals, and that for a long time there was no clear sense of what the fallout was from that war, was very disappointing, because I think that, even in defeat or in this setback, you hope that the military and the government makes it a priority to inform the families of those whose sons served, brothers served, fathers served, gives them an accounting of what happened to the best of their knowledge. But it seemed that there was a lot of disorganization. It was very disorganized and borderlined on neglect. And further moving forward in terms of the protests that are happening, I fully understand that there are political forces at play here. There is this perception of various vying power structures that someone can oversimplify and say kind of a tribal struggle within Armenia. But I would say that whatever the forces are, we can't minimize the importance of the dissatisfaction with a segment of the population that sees the government as incapable of serving the needs of the public, both in terms of informing them, giving them basic information, providing them with the basic security. And if they are, they're certainly not demonstrating it properly. I mean, every piece of information and news that I consume shows that they are moving in a direction that I think most Armenians, at least in the diaspora, are not happy with. But the flip side of that is that, for whatever reason, they were able to secure re-election, right? And I will also say this: when you look at the numbers of the re-election, one thing that was telling to me was that it wasn't the overwhelming majority of the population that voted, even during right after the quote unquote Velvet Revolution. What I saw is that there's a still large segment of the Armenian population that feels disinterested, checked out, or feels helpless in the future of the country. When I looked at the numbers of how many supposed registered voters there are and how many actually participated and with what percentage the ruling coalition won, it's not that much. I mean, it just tells you after a quote unquote Velvet Revolution, the turnout and participation should have been much higher. So, the question becomes, how do we engage those people? How do we re-engage those people? How do we re-engage people? And maybe the demonstrations happening right now will, maybe they won't. I know that prior to when the revolution, the movement happened, the protests that brought the current ruling party into power, there were a number of trickle-up movements and protests that culminated in the final protest that resulted in the change of the ruling class in Armenia. Perhaps maybe this is the same. Maybe it's not going to happen overnight. Maybe it takes a few years. But the question ultimately on a lot of people's minds is, do we have a few years? Does Artsakh have a few years? And I don't know. Look, I'll tell you the one issue that really bothered me as an outsider. And again, it's like I catch myself between wanting to say something and then biting my lip, right? It's, as Americans, we have this kind of sense of moral superiority when given all of the issues that we're dealing with here in America and all of the challenges we have in trying to create a more perfect union. Who am I to lob criticism at someone? But, from a very basic standpoint, I found it ironic that, especially the fact that the leadership of the Republic of Armenia, the prime minister is someone who has a background in journalism. And for whatever reason, the party passed, I guess, a law that criminalizes insulting the individuals in government with fines of up to $5,000 American dollars, right? If I'm not mistaken. Am I correct about the monetary amount?
It has been decriminalized since, but now there is a new proposal to establish a censorship bureau.
Yeah, but so all of those together, the fact that it even became an issue dampens the rhetoric, and I mean, it boggles my mind. When was it decriminalized, by the way?
Just recently. I think,
in the last month.
They received some blowback from foreign NGOs like the Freedom House.
Of course, as well as they should have. I mean, they should have received that blowback from the second it happened. I mean, you should see on social media some of the things that we're called here in America, and we just take that as part of the game. It is what it is. The game is the game.
The sad thing is, Ardy, we did see a lot of blowback from the local media and the local community leaders and everything. But sadly, this government doesn't listen. It listens to the international NGOs a lot more than the people.
Yeah, and I have to say, the international NGOs were indeed delayed or even I guess, complacent in the level of attention they showed to this issue until maybe sort of, it couldn't be ignored anymore.
I guess the question becomes how does something like that even become reasonable to consider, especially by a party that benefited from the free speech rules or guidelines? I mean, it becomes if it's good for the goose, why isn't it good for the gander, right? If they were able to do the things that help them assume power, why deny others the ability to benefit from those same rules of engagement in terms of addressing the political figures and individuals and policies? So that to me is probably the most concerning thing that has come about, because again, it could be a cultural thing. We're here in the United States. You've seen all how presidents are treated, both at press conferences or in the media or in political cartoons, and to take that very drastic, I think, undemocratic step was very, very concerning. And after that, it becomes very hard to be able to defend anything that is done by the government, even if it's done in their minds in the best interest of the people, because you're trying to eliminate any dissent.
Well, like I said at the very start, we had so many topics to talk about and so little time. So let's leave it there for today. Thank you for coming on the show, Ardy. We'll have you more again.
Thank you. Be safe.
Thank you, Ardy.
All right, that's our show today. As always, we really want you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter and like our Facebook page. Go, go, go. We'll talk to you soon.